Project Management for the Masses podcast, episode 35. Build your professional reputation using the internet.
Project managers, have you ever felt like you should get that promotion or a better job? Start a business. Write that book. Have you ever felt you were made for more but didn't know where to start?
Welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast with your host, Caesar Abaid.
Learn from the experts. Think outside the box. Have a voice, network, and be extraordinary.
PM for the Masses podcast.
Hello, everybody, once again, and welcome to the PM for the Masses podcast. My name is Caesar Abaid, your host, and this show is your weekly reminder that your career matters more than your job and that your life is a project and you are the manager. Whether you work for a company or for yourself, your job stability is really just your ability to land your next gig. So, join me in practicing intentional, planned, and value-adding relevance, starting right now. My friends, I feel really energized today, full of life, as I start this week. It's Sunday night here, and I'm ready to grab next week by the horns. And last Friday, I spent the day at the 11th PMI Southwestern Ontario Chapter symposium here in London. And not only did I get to meet friends, make some new friends, and also had the honor to be a speaker there. So that was really cool. And my session was really, I thought it was great. I thought it went really well. The room was full. It was probably the largest live crowd that I've had. This is the third or fourth time only that I've spoken, in public this way, and probably was the largest crowd that I've had. And it went well. So I decided for this week to take some of the content that I shared in that presentation and adapt for a podcast episode. I thought since if you couldn't make it to my session there last week, but you could get some of that information here today. So without any further ado, let's get started.
Speak up. It's time to go viral. pmforthemasses.com.
All right, guys, I like to start with a little story, okay? When I was about 19 years old, maybe 20 years old, I was a new immigrant living in Chicago. That's where I first moved to when I left Brazil. And I was attending community college there in Chicago, one of the city colleges of Chicago. And if you are from the area, you might recognize the name. I went to Truman College for 2 years, and I got my pre-engineering requirements there at Truman College. It was a great experience, and the professors there were fantastic. So if you know of Truman College, if you know somebody who goes there or teaches there, you know what I mean. It's a great college there in Chicago. And one of the classes that I had to take when I was attending Truman College was a class called Speech 101. And in that class, you learned exactly what the name says. We learned how to speak in public. So, how to stand in front of a crowd and use body language and think about the content you're going to share. And which for me was a great thing at the time because I was still learning English, and I'd been there for less than a year, and I was still very self-conscious, and I felt like I was, I would stand out when I spoke because of my accent, and I still have an accent, but I'm still working on it. I think it's going to be a lifelong journey, but it was good for me at that point, and we had a great professor, and the professor would always talk about two things that were very important. Number one, you needed to know who your audience was, right, and speak their language and see what figure out what it is that they wanted to hear or they needed to hear, and then cater a message for them. And number two, the other thing that he talked about all the time was that the presentation was. You taking your audience from point A to point B. So the presentation is not about me as a presenter. It's not even about the content per se, but it's really about the audience. And if you've been listening to this podcast long enough, you probably remember my interview with Nancy Duarte, who wrote a fantastic book called Resonate. If you haven't listened to that conversation and you're interested in giving presentations, and I mean, if you are a project manager, chances are that you would make presentations. So I recommend you go back to pmforthemasses.com and look up my interview with Nancy Duarte. And in fact, I'm going to put a link on the show notes for that episode. That way you don't have to be searching around. So just go to pmforthemasses.com/35, which is the show notes for today's show, and you'll find the link there. So yeah, just like Nancy says, he would say that you have to know that the presentation is about the audience, and it's about taking them from point A to point B, and that can mean anything. A different variety of things. It could mean that you're teaching them something, so they leave your presentation with new knowledge, or you want to change their minds about something, or you want to present some information to them so they can leave your presentation inspired to go and take action. But whatever it is, you need to think about that journey that you're taking your audience on. And that really stuck with me. And then even to this day, as I do this podcast and I think of you as my audience, I'm always thinking about how can I make your life better? How can I, affect some change in your career, in your life? I mean, I still think about those things that this professor told me way back when. And so the funny story that I one of the first times that I had to present, as he recommended, I had to think about my audience, and my audience there would be the class, the rest of the other students, and they were mostly American native speakers, and and I was the immigrant. So I thought to myself, what could I teach this group of Americans? What do I bring with me, being someone from South America, that these guys don't know. So I thought about teaching them how to drive a stick. It was one of the first things that made an impact on me was that how can people not know how to drive a standard car, a stick shift car, because most of the cars in the US are automatic, here in Canada too. So I thought I prepared a presentation explaining the mechanics of a stick shift, and I had props and I had slides, and I was all set to go. And it was my turn to speak, and I go up there in front of the class. I look at them and I freeze. I was just frozen. I remember holding my notes on my hands, and I was shaking. You could see the paper vibrating. And the professor just asked me, he said, well, are you okay? What's going on? So I said, well, no, I'm okay. So he asked me, are you prepared? I said, yeah, I'm just nervous. And so he asked me, well, why are you nervous? You said you're prepared. Have you thought about your audience? I said, yep. So he asked me, have you thought about where you want to take them, from point A to point B and all those things? I said, yes. So he goes, well, what's the problem? I said, well, the problem is I'm self-conscious. I feel like I have an accent. I feel like I may have made grammar mistakes on my slides, and I feel like people will focus on that and not on my content. And what he said to me next really stuck with me to this day. And he said, if you know where you want to take us, and you're clear, and you're passionate, and you're engaged, then the rest doesn't matter. If you make a mistake, if you have an accent, that will only add a flavor to the presentation, and people will remember that, as it's going to stick in their minds as, hey, that was the guy with the accent, and that gave me that great presentation. So learn to use that to your advantage. But as long as you focus on this journey where you're taking your audience, then an accent can be a beautiful thing, he said. And I always remember that. And when we talk about being online and affecting change and changing and using the web to help your reputation, we're going to talk about that. And we'll talk about different tools like Twitter and Facebook and blogs and things like that. And what I wanted to tell you is that those are like the accent. Those are like the slides, they're important, but they're secondary. What's really important is the fact that when you are online, the world is your audience. So I'm here talking in this podcast, which is online content, and it's out there in the world. So in a way, everything that you do online picture the world as your audience. And if you want to make the web work for you, you need to think about that as a presentation. When you go online and you comment on a blog post or you answer a question on LinkedIn, you are standing in front of a large audience, and you want to take them from point A to point B, and that is point A where they don't know who you are, they don't know how competent you are, to point B where they know exactly what you want them to know about you, right? So this is the heart of what I'm trying to tell you here today, is that there's a gap between what the web knows about you and what you want them to know about you, right? So if you have time, just go online and Google your name, right? In my case, it's fairly easy because my name is very unusual, but if you have a more common name, let's say your name is John Smith, go on Google and put John Smith within quotation marks. That way Google would search for that exact string and not just John and Smith, right? If you have a middle name, put that in there too and see what comes up. And you might be surprised. And guess what? If you are applying for a job, or if you are a contractor and you're trying to get into a contract, this is one of the first things that people will do when they see your name and they don't know you. They're going to search for your name on the internet. And it's a very, it could be a very scary thing when you do that, especially if you have not been intentional about directing the web to where you want it to go when it comes to your name, right? So what I want to tell you here today is that you need to be intentional about taking your audience, which is the world, the web, from point A to point B, where point A is where the internet doesn't really know who you are or what you are about, to a point B where you kind of describe the narrative that describes you. So when people search for you, when people search for things related to you, they find what you want them to find, which is good things, things that are professional, things that are in line with your message, in short, right? So let's talk about the internet then. What is the internet? So I have here a definition of the internet that I found in the Oxford Dictionary, and it says, the internet is a global computer network providing a variety of information and communication facilities consisting of interconnected networks using standardized communication protocols. And that is accurate, but really doesn't mean anything. So I want you to forget that. And here's my definition of the internet. The internet, if you think of the internet as a Venn diagram with two bubbles, okay? The internet is the intersection of people and content, is where people and content intersect. And if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, everything on the internet has to do with content and people. Yeah? Think about blogs. A blog is content written by people, right? Think of Facebook, social media. Facebook is a bunch of people writing comments, which are content, right? Status updates, content by people. Think of Twitter, same thing. It's content that is limited to 140 characters, posted by people. Even YouTube. What's YouTube? It's video content that's being posted by people, being commented on by people. So the web is content and people. And every time you think about the web, and if you want to be leveraging the internet to help you, you need to understand that you're going to have to deal with content and people in one way or another. And if you get that, then you're going to start really moving forward, right? So, as I said, you want to take your audience from point A to point B. So you need to know what point B is before you start, trying to convey that message out there. So, and the question is, what do you want to be known for, right? If you remember back, I think it was episode, I don't know, it was single digits episodes. Okay, I don't remember exactly the number, but it was an interview I did with Carl Pritchard. And Carl Pritchard is the risk management guy. Okay, and he's known for being the risk management guy. He wrote the chapter in the PMBOK guide related to risk management. Everything he writes about has to do with risk management. So that is what he's known for, right? So if you just want to be known as an expert in project management, for example, that's fine. That's a start. But the problem there is that project management is too big It's too broad. It's too wide, right? It's a huge haystack, right? So you need to do what Carl did. You need to find a subset of project management that you have, knowledge of, or you have a passion for, and then try to dominate that sub niche, right? And you can even take it further. So for example, let's say you want to talk about risk management. You can talk about risk management in North America, or you can talk about risk management in oil and gas, or you can talk about risk management in oil and gas in the oil sands of Canada. You can be that guy. And in the smaller and the more, defined the sub niche is, the better it is for you to find and generate content online that is related to that, right? And the smaller the haystack, so the easier it is for you to stand out. Okay. So you need to know what you want to be known for. Even as you apply for jobs, right? You need to stand for something. Carl Pritchard, for example, he's the risk management guy. So if he ever goes to a job interview, he can talk about that for hours, because it's his passion, it's his knowledge, and they intersect. So when you think about that as a Venn diagram with 3 circles. Okay, so one circle is knowledge. So it helps if it's something you're really knowledgeable about. That goes without saying. The other circle in the Venn diagram would be passion, because this is gonna, shaping your image online is gonna take work. You're gonna have to interact with content. You're gonna have to generate content. You're gonna have to write and answer questions, and it helps if it's a topic that you are passionate about, because I always use this example. You have to choose that topic that when it comes up at dinner parties, and you start talking about it, your wife rolls her eyes, oh, here he goes again, or your husband, rolls his eyes, here she goes again. It's that thing that you can go on and on about. So that's passion, right? So the 3-circle Venn diagram: knowledge, passion. The third circle is demand, right? So it really helps if it's a topic or an industry where there's demand for information, right? So if you can find that intersection of knowledge, passion, and demand, then you're golden. Then you're good to go. So, and so this is just an exercise for you to find out what it is that you want to be known for, right? So, in other words, you need to define that so you can create a narrative, because that's how people remember you. It's creating a narrative. And I can give you an example, right? The example is going to be what I'm doing here right now with this podcast, right? This is what I'm trying to do here. I'm creating content. I'm trying to take an audience, which is the world of project management, from point A, where they had no idea who I was, to point B, to where they have exactly the idea that I want them to have about me, right? So here's an example, right? When I say create a narrative, when you think of PM for the masses, when you think of my name, what is there something that comes to mind? Is there like a tagline or a sentence or something that you associate me and my podcast with? Can you think of a tagline, or can you think of a short sentence that describe what I do? Think about it for like 2 seconds. Now, chances are that you came up with one of these: either life is a project and you're the manager, or something like your careers matters more than your job, or your ability to your job stability is your ability to land your next gig. And this is my narrative. This is what I want to be known for, as the guy who had project management changed his life. I'm the guy who can talk about project management because it really helped him, right? And the guy who is out there trying to help others to see that as well, and take their careers, take charge of their careers and their lives, and take them to new levels. So that is my narrative, and week in and week out, I talk about this, right? So over time, my audience goes from not knowing who I am to, through a narrative, they come to this association, right? So that's what you want to do as well. So I'm not saying you should have a podcast. I'm not saying you should have even a blog, but you need to have an idea for this narrative, right? For who you are and what you stand for. And project management is so broad, it's really easy for you to find that one unique type of angle that applies to you. For example, during my presentation, there was a lady who asked me a question, about separating private and professional life, and she works in project management, but she also has a band, and she didn't feel like she should mix them together. And I told her, listen, there's a lot of people talking about project management. There's a lot of people talking about being in a band, but how many people are mixing these insights of being a band member, and let's say putting a concert together, and project management? I can think of a number of things that you can talk about from that perspective that is truly unique to your experience, right? So we all have that special angle, our own voice that is very unique. And if we find that sub niche, the subset of project management or whatever, it doesn't have to be project management, if you can find that corner of the market that where you can bring a unique voice and you can speak with passion, or you can write with passion, then that's you creating a narrative, right? So think about that as you move forward, where you want to take your audience, and what is the narrative you want to present to them, right? Now, let's talk about this thing. This is the relationships that you can have with the web. And this is something I came up with, right? There are 4 types of relationships that you can have with the internet, okay? And I named them bad, neutral, good, and best, okay? So what is the relationship between you and the internet that is not good? So what is the bad relationship that you and the internet can have? The bad relationship is when the internet provides the world with an undesired image of you. So when, if you go and Google your name, instead of positive things like, an article or you as being listed as an employee of a reputable company, what shows up is, negative things. So for example, pictures from a party or let's say a negative comment that you left on a forum, or things that you don't want to necessarily be associated with, right? So that's the first level of the relationship between you and the web. The second level is the neutral. That's when you are not really online. All you have is an email account, and if people search for your name and search for you, nothing really pops up. Maybe a white pages listing, and that's about it. And that's better than bad, but not really good. I mean, that's not really doing anything for you. The third level is when it's good, and that's where you want to be. And that's when people search for your name, they find what it is that you want to be associated with, right? So they find the desired image that you have, that you want to have. So in the case of Carl Pritchard, for example, when people search for his name on Google, for example, all sorts of content and articles and white papers and symposium, listings, everything that has to do with risk management starts to pop up. All right, so that's where you want to be. That's the third level, and that's what I'm trying to do here with this podcast. When people search for my name, good things like the podcast and some of the awards that my podcasts have received, that those things pop up. So that's the third level. That's when people search for you, they find the desired image. Now, the fourth and last level is the best, and that's the hardest one to get. But maybe you can imagine what that is right now. That is when they search for your desired image, they find you, right? And that's the hardest one. So in the case of Carl Pritchard, I keep using him as an example. That is when people search for risk management online, they start finding Carl Pritchard. You see the difference there between searching for Carl Pritchard and finding risk management. Now you're looking for risk management and finding Carl Pritchard, right? It's like it's like digging through the haystack and keep finding needles, And so that's like, the holy grail of the relationship between you and the internet. And it's very hard to do. But if you get to good, that might be just good enough. When people search for you, they start to find things that you want them to find, right? And here's a challenge: you can't just phone Google and say, "Hey Google, when people search for my name, please show them this." It doesn't work that way, right? It takes work. But if you don't get started, then you'll never get there, and it can be a long process, but you need to start somewhere. So let's talk about some of the strategies, right? And again, if you remember, I mentioned that the internet is it's the intersection of people and content. So these strategies I'm going to talk about here today, we're going to be talking about content and people, all right? And I'll just give you an example of how it is that I work here on PM for the Masses, right? And in order to kind of use this example, I want to bring up a concept that I read on the book Platform by Michael Hyatt when he describes the web. So he describes the web in terms of home base and outposts, right? So what are the outposts? Outposts are websites like LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Pinterest, Vimeo, forums, all these websites where you can go and there's a bunch of people there talking about different things, right? So for example, LinkedIn groups, those are outposts. And and those are great sites for you to go and display your expertise by answering questions, by asking questions, by interacting with people and networking with people. And those are great. And the main advantage of these sites is that, number one, there's a number of people, millions of people who frequent them. They go there all the time and they're looking to network, and it's a great place to meet people, right? So it's a great place to go there and kind of showcase and start establishing yourself as that authority. But the drawback is that you have very little control over these sites because they're not yours, right? So let's say if LinkedIn changes their rules tomorrow and all of a sudden, all the content, all the questions that you answered, all the communications that you've had with people there, now they're lost, then really you're lost, right? So you can't have all your eggs in these baskets because they're outposts. They're like the bar. You go, meet people, hang out, have a good time, but then you always have to come home. Which takes me to the home base concept, right? So there's, again, outposts and home base. Home base is a place on the web that is yours, that you have control over, and over the content, over the looks, and the rules, right? So in my case, it's pmforthemasses.com. That's my home base. That's where I post my podcast episodes, my comments, and blog posts. And that's why I have my list of resources, my contact page, and this is my home. I have control over this. Well, that's the main advantage of the home base is that, again, you have control over it. The disadvantage is it's not nearly as, visited as a place like LinkedIn, right? But you need to have is a combination of both. You need to have your home base, and then you need to go into the outposts and hang out, right? So you go. So let's say my workflow here, for example, I publish a blog post or a podcast episode, and then I go on LinkedIn and I share it there, and then people comment there, and I interact with people there, and that creates some interest on those people to come and visit my home base, pmforthemasses.com. Right? Or I can go on LinkedIn and I see a question that someone posed. Let's say, keep using Carl Pritchard as an example, but let's say somebody posts a question about risk management. I can answer that question and say, hey, and by the way, there's more about this topic on this episode of PM for the Masses podcast when I interviewed the top risk management, expert out there, Carl Pritchard. Here's the link. Now I'm providing value, I'm showing my expertise there, and I'm also encouraging people to come and visit my home base, right? And then, so there's that back and forth. So that's one way that you can do to be present on both your home base and your outposts. Now, there's a lot of people who they're really active in the outposts, and that's a great start, right? But they have no home base. And if you are, so a lot of my listeners, for example, I know that they're on the Google Plus community and they provide great value there. And I think if you don't have a home base, you might be missing an opportunity here, to capitalize on that knowledge and passion that you have by having that website or a place that you call your own on the web. And that's why I did that webinar with Dustin Hartzler that shows you how to set up a blog in the right way. And you can, I'm going to add a link to that webinar. It's on YouTube now. It's been viewed by hundreds of people now. So I'll put a link there. Then if you're interested in having a home base, you can go there and go through the steps. I mean, it's a screencast that we did. But anyway, so and then there's a lot of people as well who have home bases. They have their blogs or their websites, and they post some stuff there, but they never go out to the outposts, right, where the people are. So those guys are also missing an opportunity to engage with where people are hanging out. It's so you need to have, it's like having a home, but also a social life. You need to have a little bit of both for you to kind of excel out there. So as I said, you need to engage with content and people. So let's talk about engaging with content for a bit. And the way I see it, there's two types of content. There's content that is created by other people, and there's content that's created by you, right? If you're starting right now, the best and easiest way is to engage with content that is already there, right? Created by other people. So in the case of Carl Pritchard, I keep using, I'm going to have to, his ear is probably really hot right now, but let's say risk management is your thing. So one thing that you can do to start establish yourself as a name in that field is to go and find other people who are creating content in that area, right? So if I'm Carl Pritchard and I'm starting out right now, I would go and search for blogs and for websites from different companies, maybe authors of books on this topic, and see what they're writing. So the easiest thing that you can do to if you're starting is to act a little bit like a curator. You collect information and blog posts written by different people and start sharing them as, hey, look what I found. Hey, look what I found. And one thing that I do is on Twitter. Twitter, if you don't know, it's like a micro blogging platform. So you post a little status update. It's 140 characters long, and you can include a link in that string. So instead of just saying, "Hey, I'm having ham and eggs, it's delicious," you can say, "Hey, I'm having ham and eggs, it's delicious. Here's the recipe," and then you put a link to it, right? And then people can click. So one thing that I do on Twitter is I post throughout the day. I post blog posts and podcast episodes and other types of content from people that are posting about project management or people who are posting about, mindset change and taking life by the horns. This inspirational content out there that I enjoy, and I collect all these blog posts and I link to them on my Twitter account. So if you're following me on Twitter, you are seeing posts by me throughout the day that has to do with project management and that has to do with topics that align that themselves with life is a project and you're the manager, right? And during my session, I kind of shared my workflow. I don't have a whole lot of time here on the podcast episode, and I can't share my screen with you. But what I do is I have an application that collects blog posts by different people that I trust and shows me as a list, right? It's an RSS reader. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry. It's basically an application that collects blog posts as they are available and list them in one place. So I don't have to, so if I follow, let's say, 50 bloggers, I don't have to visit 50 websites every day to see if there's a new blog post. This application searches these blogs that I subscribe to and brings them into one page, either on my phone or on my tablet or on my computer. And then once a day, I can go through the blog posts that have been published. And then from there, I can share, right, on social media and different places. So That's one idea that you can do. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort. You don't need to create any content, but you are engaging with content, right? So when you start sharing that, people are going to start following you on Twitter, and then the authors of those blog posts, they will thank you for sharing, and then you can start creating a relationship with them. And now we're kind of merging from content to people, right? So now people are following you. You're connecting with people. And you're connecting with these authors who are thought leaders in your niche, and you start building those relationships, right? And one thing you need to do from the get-go, if you are really intentional about having the web work for you, again, I talk about content and people, is you need to really foster your network. You need to take care of it, and you need to be very intentional about that, because it's very easy to lose track of your network, and you don't want to do that, right? So I use an application called HighRise, and you can find that at highrisehq.com, which is a CRM, is a customer relationship management system. So I can add people to my database of connections, and then add notes about them, set up tasks associated with them, and things like that. So, and whether you use HighRise or not, it doesn't matter. That's just a tool. But my point is, you need to keep track of your network somehow. And LinkedIn is a good place to do that. But the problem is, not everybody's on LinkedIn. Facebook is great as well for you to keep track of your connections. But again, not everyone is on Facebook. And so you need, my opinion is, you need to have your own method, your own system for keeping track of your network. And HighRise works for me. You might have something that works for you, but the point is, you need to have something. All right, so again, always remember that it's people and content, right? So this is just one idea that you can do, you can apply to start engaging with content, is being a curator. And at the same time you're doing this, the other things, the next level is, besides sharing them, one step before you start creating your own content as standalone blog posts or articles, is to go and comment on existing content, right? And there's a number of ways you can do this. You can, again, find those bloggers that are blogging about your topic. And once there's new blog posts, you can go and add a comment, and be specific on your comment. You can thank them for writing the blog post or the article, and then you can say, hey, I really like, point number 3 that you made, and then you can tell them why, and then kind of shows that you kind of know a little bit what you're talking about, and that can spark a conversation, right? That can lead into two things: content and people. It can lead to you showcase even more of what you know by answering some questions. And number 2, it can lead to a relationship there with a thought leader in your niche, right? So adding comments is a great way to do that. And you can add comments straight onto most of the blogs will allow you to leave a comment. For example, pmforthemasses.com, you can actually go to pmforthemasses.com/35, which is the blog post associated with today's episode, and you can leave a comment right there. Most blogs will let you do that. You can leave a comment on LinkedIn after people share something there, and you can start creating your own content that way as well. Now, after you go through, being a curator and adding comments and sharing things, then you can get to the point where you can create your own content, and that's the very best, right? That's where you want to be. Once you start doing that on a regular basis, then really you can start steering this ship, towards that, that point B where you want to take your audience, right? So I've created so many podcast episodes that you can't search for my name online and not bump into one of them, So, and that's where you want to go. So as an example here for creating your own content, I can share with you how I do things here. So number 1, I decided what I want to be known for, and I decided how I'm going to take my audience there by creating a narrative. And then I decided that I'm going to do this on a consistent basis. So I decided that this podcast is going to be a weekly show. And the few times where I missed the mark and I didn't publish an episode, you probably remember I made a big deal out of it because it is a big deal to me, Like, for example, tonight, I'm kind of tired. It was a long weekend where the kids are sick. My wife is upstairs now. One of the kids was crying. So really wanted to go to bed. Man, I need to keep this weekly thing. It's very important to me that I'm consistent. Number one, because, it's good for this narrative that I'm creating, but also I got to a point now that I have literally thousands of people downloading this show every time I put out a new episode, and they kind of learn to expect it every Monday morning. So again, I'm using content to foster a relationship with people, right? So when I don't post an episode, some of you guys write me and say, hey, are you okay? What's going on, right? So I'm fostering these relationships because they're important to me. Some of them became my friends, but even if they're not my friends, these are potential relationships, and that is everything, again, content and people. So it's a weekly show. And again, I talk about items that are related to this narrative that I want to create. So I talk about project management concepts, right? I do interviews with people who are really good at these topics. And I also talk about personal productivity, which is a very important topic to me. It's something that I'm passionate about. I can talk about it for a long time. And I also talk about how to start something weird, something different, how to start your platform, how to start a blog, how to write a book, and do these things that will make you stand out. And that's what I want to be known for. So that's what I talk about in my podcast. Like this episode, for example, it's about doing something different with your career by using the web. So it goes along with my narrative. So I put this content out there, right? And then, but I don't stop there, right? Because again, the web is made out of home base and outposts. So I publish this content, and then I go on social media and forums and different places, and I post it there, and I answer questions there. And there is this back and forth between the content that I create and the people that I want to reach with that content. And little by little, I start to create this narrative that has to do with the niche that I want to be in and the journey that I want to take the audience on, right? So let's say you're inspired by this. So where do you start, right? I wanted to share a few resources here with you that I think will be helpful. Number one, the book that talks about the web being a combination of outposts and home base, and is a book called Platform by Michael Hyatt, and I will have links to this book on the show notes. This book is like the Bible, for anyone who wants to use the web to create a platform, so you can be heard. I think the tagline for the show is "Get noticed in a noisy world." Very, very helpful book. It talks about creating content and building relationships and all these things that I'm talking about here today. Very good book. Number two is if you want to start your home base, there is a webinar that I talked about earlier that you can find that at pmforthemasses.com/startablog altogether, start a blog. Or you can also go to pmforthemasses.com/35 and you can find the link there. And again, I will take you by the hand and I'll show you how to set up, how to get a domain name, how to, it's very inexpensive to do that. It's a few dollars, less than $10 per month. You can have your website with your own domain name, your own home base on the web, which I think anybody who wants to be intentional about being, using the web to empower themselves, they should have, So that's another resource. And of course, the podcast here is a good resource for you as well. And I really encourage you to follow up on with the guests that I have here on the show, because these are people that I've researched or people that I've had relationship with in the past, and people that I trust. And if you trust me, a friend of mine, you've heard that before. And a friend of mine is a friend of mine. And how does it go again? A friend of a friend is a friend, right? So For example, Patrick Snow, I had him on the show last week. I met him in person. I attended 2 of his sessions at the symposium last week. And the guy is just a powerhouse, man. He's inspirational. He has a lot of neat ideas on how to take life by the horns and just make things happen. So, and he has 2 books that he's written. I really recommend you go and follow up on him. And so this podcast here can be the starting point for you. If you follow up on each one of the guests that I've had in the last 35 episodes, man, you're gonna be busy. But that might just be enough for you to get started. So I really recommend you follow up on these wonderful people that I've had here on the show. And I'm here as well to help you. So if you need anything, if you have any questions about any of these things, for example, during my presentation there at the symposium, I was surprised that a lot of people didn't know what Twitter was, and sometimes, I've used this a lot and take it for granted that people know how to use it, and they don't. So if some of this stuff went over your head and you'd like more information on how we do things, let me know. And if there's enough interest, I might, do an episode on some of these tools. Who knows? So I really hope that this was helpful to you today, and as you continue to interact with the internet. And remember, if there's anything I want you to remember after today's episode, is that the internet is about content and people. Content and people. Content and people. All right. All right. So before I go, I wanted to talk a little bit about the symposium that I attended and spoke at last Friday. I just wanted to tell you it was a great time, and the volunteering team did a phenomenal job. And I'd like to personally thank especially Danelle Pedel, who was the project manager for the event. She's a past president of our chapter, and she took charge of the symposium. And the entire board of directors and the volunteers who put on this flawless and beautiful event. It's a beautiful thing when you have an event planned by a team of project managers. Things just kind of tend to work. It's really cool. And it was announced by our current president Cameron Khan, that we are having another episode symposium next year. I believe it's April 15th. So if you're listening to this episode a few months into the future, I'm putting this out around mid-April 2014. So if you are listening to this episode later in the year, make sure to visit pmiswoc.org. That's pmiswoc.org for more information on the next symposium. I am definitely going to be there unless something really weird happens, and I'd love to meet with you there. And I tell you, this symposium, this is the second year that I've attended. It's worth the trip. So if you are within driving distance, you can drive, and by all means, if you want to fly here, hang out with us, that would be fantastic as well. One more thing, I had a chance to meet with Patrick Snow, the guest that I had last week, as I said, and he also he was the opening keynote for the event. I tell you, what a guy! That guy was really cool, and he ended up attending my session. And later I went and asked him, so what, you do this for a living, so what do you think of the job I did here? And he gave me the most positive feedback I could expect, and it was really cool. And it was cool because just a couple of days before then, I got an invitation to speak at another event being organized by another PMI chapter here in Ontario. So since this is something I enjoy, I'm thinking that maybe I could give this a try, a more serious consideration to speaking more. So if you are organizing an event and believe that I could be a good addition to your roster as a speaker, I'd love to hear from you, okay? And even if you are in a different country, just let me know. And you can contact me through the website at pmforthemasses.com, and you can click on the contact link on the top menu there on pmforthemasses.com. And again, all the links that I talked about here today, you can find at pmforthemasses.com/35. And really, that's it for today. I really wish you a wonderful week, and I will speak with you next time. And until then, remember that life is a project, and you, my friend, are the manager. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you for listening to the PM for the Masses podcast.
Tune in next week for more great ideas on how to manage your projects better and truly stand out in your industry.
PMforthemasses.com